Today I'm going to speak, as you can see, on my book project. It's a very broad topic, but I'm going to also examine one particular example I've been investigating. But before, let me sketch the wider overview and what my case study has to do with the general framework I propose. This title is actually tentative title of my book project, which started with the well-known concept of Orientalism, which has been dismantled in many ways, as you know. But not that much has been spoken about East European Orientalism, and especially when the Jews were involved. I'm not speaking here about the Zionist project. I'm treating it, of course, as a part of a conversation, but not the whole picture. So in the 19th century, depictions of the East, that is of Africa and Asia, became widespread, and this particular form of representation justified a sense of the West's cultural supremacy. Known as Orientalism, of course, this intellectual trend created a false distinction between the so-called traditional Orient and the modern West. These representatives of the Orient also represented and implicated Jews. And as Ivan Kalmar and Derek Penzler demonstrated, Jews tended to react to this anti-Jewish Orientalism in one of the three ways. First was by, in general, dismissing it. Second one was kind of embracing it by glorifying themselves as offsprings of the Orient. And the third one was framing non-acculturated Jews, mostly living to the east of them, as Oriental. So that was in particular done by German jury who endorsed the latter two strategies. So on the one hand, they glorified the Orient. On the other hand, they looked at Jews living in Russian Empire and Austro-Hungarian Empire. They looked down at them, speaking about them as savage brethren. So at the same time, the Polish Jewish elites, Polish Jewish intelligentsia wanted to be a part of this Western discourse. So they very well were aware of those labeling. So my question, which lays at core of my book, is how it worked in interwar period when we don't have those big empires, when we have nationalisms and new dimensions which also play a role, and new discourses. So that's my general assumption is that the interwar Polish Jews, shaped by their self-perceived and externally ascribed peripherality, they applied the so-called mirror tools in the ways in which they shaped their representations of Jews of the West Asia and North Africa. So they carried the same policy of condensation and dismissal of those Jews to the east and the south of them. But that's just a general assumption. That's the zoom out. And when we zoom in, we see more details and we complicate the picture. So this is what this book, I hope, is going to do. And I'm looking through different areas. I'm asking 3 questions. I'm asking how the encounters between Polish Jews and Jews from West Asia, North Africa happened in the interwar period. Who was meeting whom? And finally, what were the reactions and what these potential encounters or ideas about the encounters cause? And the answers to these questions are constructed in the project around 3 different areas. First is the space, people, and discourse. And when we speak about space, it's usually those meetings didn't take place, or there were like just the imaginations of meetings, or there were reports about meetings. So here on the slide, so Poland is one of the spaces I'm examining. And here you can see pictures which were reproduced in Nasz Przegląd, which was the Polish Jewish newspaper, very popular in the interwar time, published in Warsaw. And those are pictures from Persia. There in the middle, you have the anthropological discourse of the time, which also Polish Jewish scientists were taking part in. And here is excerpt, like popular excerpt from this research done by Salomon Czortkower, who was using all this data to speak about the Yemenite Jews, but also Jews of Poland, using similar methods as Nazis, but going into different conclusions. And on the very right, you can see the picture of Bracha Zefira, who was a singer touring in Poland in interwar time. And this is my case I'm gonna speak today more about. I'm also examining material culture. Here you can see this is a cooking book, the Yiddish Koch. Actually, that's the plagiarized version of the French, Jewish French cookbook with all the names of the meals just transcribed into Yiddish, with the meals popular in Egypt and Morocco. So this is one of the traces of the encounters I found as well. The second space I'm analyzing, it's the middle ground. So the dynamics is a bit different. I chose France because that's the meeting point of the 2 diasporas in the interwar times. We have big migration from Poland to France, but we also have migration of North African Jews to France, and those 2 communities meet. And this is a very interesting dynamic when they negotiate their position in France and negotiate who is more French, actually. And sometimes, and here I'm blurring the picture, sometimes they don't live next to each other and not interfere sometimes, and it's depending on their social background and their ideologies they believe in. Sometimes they mingle. And here you can see a picture of family store from the family story I found of Adèle Rubin, who was born in Przedbush, and in Paris she met Jules Lelouch from Monastir. They both were artists, were very secular, and they married, and she moved to Tunisia before the Second World War. And this is how they both survived the Holocaust. And the third space, and this is actually a very reverse dynamic to the dynamic in Poland, is the meetings in MENA and or WANA, how you call it, so Middle East, North Africa, or West Asia, North Africa. So here we have actually really small community of Polish Jews trying to somehow do their things there. So establishing businesses, not always legal businesses, sometimes using their imperial connections. So here on the very left, you can see the mugshot actually of Joseph Raskin, but that's from the case of Michael Halbert from Bolechov, who was a drug dealer in Egypt, and he made the Jewish community in Alexandria actually and Cairo actually looking bad. So they didn't, the local community didn't endorse this like big oncoming Polish Jewish population. On the right, you can see the paper, a professional paper of Leo Agaten, who is a businessman from Krakow in Casablanca, selling goods from Casablanca to Poland, so also using his established contacts. And he also was one of the supporters of L'Avenir Illustré, that was a very progressive and Zionist-leaning newspaper in Morocco at the time. And here you can see another example that's identity card of Rebecca Goldman, Rivka Goldman, as you see still here, signing her documents as Rivka. Later on, when she moved to Lebanon, she was signing the documents as Rebecca, and she Frenchified her identity, and she was one of Alliance teachers in Beirut. So I'm examining, you see, different documents, different stories to show and blur the assumption I told you about before. And today, as I said, I'm going to speak about one of the cases, which is Bracha Zefira's tour in 1929, and it will do also with Zionism, though maybe not that directly. So here you can see the picture which was advertising her shows. That's the picture from Lubliner Tagblatt. You see how she was presented sitting barefoot with bare arms, huge smile, staring into camera. She evoked myths about women of the Orient as sexually charged. And even though it's a picture from black and white newspaper, you could see that her complexion is darker than the complexion of her target audiences in Poland. So Her tour in 1929 serves me as a point of contact between Polish Jewry and Oriental Jewish culture, the so-called Oriental, quote unquote. The singer visited not only major cities in Poland like Warsaw, Krakow, Łódź, Lublin, and Białystok, but also smaller places, peripheral, such as Grodno, Włodzimierz, Tomaszów Mazowiecki, Chełm, Brześć. So she was actually all around in 1929, and I argued that those concerts contributed to both breaching and sustaining boundaries between Polish Jews and Jews from Islamic countries, with the Middle East to be imagined as backward periphery to modern Poland's cultural center. So drawing on articles about Zefira Polish tour of 1929 in both the general and the general Polish and Polish Jewish press, I analyzed the discourse of place and the function of exotic other in interwar Poland, which itself had no shortage of internal exotic others, and Jews were one of them. Through the medium of contemporary descriptions of Zefira performances in Polish city and the reception by Jewish and non-Jewish audiences in Poland, I examined various images of so-called Oriental Jews in 1920s. Bracha Zefira was born in 1911 in the Jerusalem quarter of Nahalat Tzvi. She was the daughter of Yemeni-born Jews, Yosef and Naama Zefira. Her mother died at childbirth and her father from disease when she was free. So she was adopted by another Yemenite family living nearby. Later on, she was sent to another foster family in a Bukharian quarter of Jerusalem. There she stayed for 3 years, and then she moved to Yemin Moshe, where most of the residents at the time were of Greek origin. So at the very young age, she was exposed to like different Jewish cultures, to Yemenite, to Bukharian Jewish culture, and to Greek culture. Around 1924, she moved to Mer Shefi. That was an orphanage which was founded in 1923 as a children's village, rural community, and children lived there together and learned agricultural skills. The director of the village and his wife, they noticed that she has musical talent and musical skills, and they encouraged her to perform. Firstly, during Shabbat events, during Shabbat night performances for the orphanage. Later on, they sent her to Tel Aviv to study, and she was then sent and supported by Mayor, among others, by Mayor Dizengoff, mayor of Tel Aviv, who sent her to study in Berlin at Max Reinhardt studio. During this course of her life, she also met Nahum Nardi, who is actually very crucial in her career, and also he was her partner. She met him in 1929, and later they're married on. He was from Russia, and during her career, he served as her accompanier and also as her manager. And he made the songs she was performing attuned to European ear. So they were consciously working on her image to be Oriental, but not too Oriental. Zefira's tour in Poland was a great success. But it seems that not only the music attracted the people, but one might even say that in spite of the music, people came to her performances. The tour organizers were aware that what attracts people was not that much probably what she was singing, but how she looked and what she was symbolizing. So the advertisements were having sometimes provocative descriptions, such as the fiery Yemenite or the marvelous Palestinian singer full of temperament and exotic charm, a typical Jewish beauty, a long Yemenite girl with fiery eyes and marvelously sweet smile revealing shiny and white teeth. So, as Carla Peterson suggests, as we observe bodies, our own and others' bodies, we need to acknowledge that we are never just looking at individual bodies, but we connect these to other bodies by comparison. So placing them in groups, especially those of gender, family, race, nation, and then endowing them with a group identity. So Zefira's body was automatically employed as a synecdoche for the Yemenite Jews, or even more broadly to the Jews from the Middle East, North Africa. So reviewers contrasted the Yemenites with their own Ashkenazic readers, describing the former as very primitive and lacking in culture. They did not conceal their amazement that Zefira was not to their minds a stereotypical Yemenite woman. So they wrote, for instance, after all, the Yemenites still dwell among superstitions and habits that imitate Muslim life. The women still wear curtains over their faces, and they do not show themselves in public, not to mention performing on stage. Such a thought would never cross their minds, and suddenly a Yemenite dares to show herself on stage with her face unveiled. The notes advertising her performances usually stress the notions of the backwardness of Yemenites. So, for instance, and I quote, the Yemenites are a primitive people. They have no major or famous writers or composers, though they do produce interesting folk songs. Just as the Polish Jews were themselves portrayed by the Western and general Polish press as backward and primitive, in view of their birthplace and their traditionalism, Jewish journalists in interwar Poland depicted their Zefira and Yemenite Jews as a specific type of Jew. And of course, this is not just typical to those journalists. This stance was typical of Zionist-leaning intellectuals who adapted to the discourse of speaking up for the disfranchised and or lamenting what they saw as a waning authenticity in their own culture. So, for example, even in Mandate Palestine, you see similar descriptions of Yemenite Jews, and there was this a beauty pageant of Queen Esther, and when one of the winners was Tzipora Tzabari in 1928, she was who was of Yemenite origin. She was described in a very similar way. So as I said, articles which were published after Zefira's performances and those which advertised her performances focused on her appearance, and her body was deeply fetishized. The Yiddish singer, folklore collector, and writer and photographer, who was this? Menachem Kipnis. He wrote for Hind, commented that Zefira was a young child, a Black Palestinian with black Eastern eyes and beautiful teeth. Other reporters stressed her primitiveness. Literarische Blätter called her a primitive beauty. And they admitted that they had not expected the show to be so accomplished. Exposure to primitiveness also was not just something very typical just for the Jewish audiences. It was very typical of the times. That was the zeitgeist, especially in the milieus that aspire to be perceived as modern and progressive. And here comes to mind Paul Gauguin, who leaves France and goes to Tahiti to develop new way of painting, or Ballet Russe, which were a Paris-based ballet company introducing to European and American audiences the motifs drawn from Russian folklore. One of the most popular primitive artists of the time in 1920s was French performer Josephine Baker. So that was like what Zefira and Nahum Nardi were doing, was the way the shows were sold at the time, and they were doing this consciously. They were playing with their Orientalness. As I mentioned, Zefira and Nardi deliberately constructed an image of her that conformed to contemporary Polish Jewish middle class anxieties and fantasies about themselves, and that they projected onto Middle East. So as you see, she performed barefoot, long flowing hair, and advertisement highlighting her showy, theatrical, Oriental costumes. This was a quote. And also, what was stressed in the coverage was her age. What's interesting is that she wasn't in particular younger than other artists performing at the time in Poland. She was 18. And when you look at the bios of the artists performing at the time, they're also 18, but it's not that much stressed. And here they always write, oh, she's like child looking beauty. The focus on her being just over the border of a minor helped to infantilize her and allowed her to be treated paternalistically rather than as a mature partner. This investment also, that's a side note, that's investment in exoticism. It's not just, again, it's not just Zefira and Nardi's story in 1929 Poland. This is also Polish stage at the time, and also Polish Jewish stage at the time. The exotic numbers, this is how it was called, were frequent features of review programs in Poland, especially with Hawaiian motifs at the time. That was popular. Also, there were films working with these motifs, for instance, which were produced a bit later, but in 1932 and 1934, by Michał Waszyński, who was also a Polish-Jewish director. He directed two of the films which have these motifs. It's the Sound of the Desert, in Polish Głos Pustyni, and Black Pearl, Czarna Perła. And we have there are Arab protagonists and Tahitian protagonists. So this is something which attracted audiences at the time. And another key element of Zefira's paradoxical image in the Polish Jewish press was her glorification as an offspring of the Orient. So that's the strategy I mentioned before. So she embodied the desire among certain Polish Jewish intellectuals to return to the cradle of Judaism and to be true Jews. So her body reminded audiences of their imagined homeland, Eretz Israel, and no, that was a place beyond time and space that existed in their minds. And again, this is like for the description of Yemenite Jews. This is very typical, and Yemenite Jews were also in Mandate Palestine were perceived as the true selves, and they were used as models for painters, and also Eliezer Ben Yehuda thought that he was fascinated by them, and he claimed that the study of their customs could help establish how Jews behaved in Mishnaic times. So the Yemenite Jews were perceived as this link between Bible times and the present. So the trope of Zefira authentic Jewishness, as reflected in her Palestinian roots, was described in the reviews published in Poland after her shows. So we read, for instance, it smelled of Palestinian night. The great moon glowed green. The camels rose from the desert and set off. The sweet tone of the flute rang out from a distance, and the seconds of young Bedouin began to jangle. Through the pale rays, the night carried a sad song and the sound of bare feet dancing hora. So Zefira performances were designed to bring her audiences closer to the essence of the new old Jewish identity. The Jewish Daily in Grodno, the Grodner Moment, claimed, in a word, Bracha Zefira is not an average singer with a more or less pleasing voice. She is an original product born in Eretz Israel. The very same note was also published in Brześć, where Zefira performed in November in 1929. Menachem Kipnis even suggested that other performers who came to Poland from Palestine, but who were of Ashkenazic origin, were fake. And Zefira was true because Orientalism in her blood and soul was full of melancholy. And Literarische Blätter wrote that she seemed so distant and alien, but when she started to sing, she became so familiar. Her singing and soul were sunny and biblical. One feels as it were past generations singing. So as I mentioned, the Yemenite Jews served here as this living testimony, as a link, and that's the long tradition I can elaborate on. All in all, it seems that far less attention, as I said, was paid to Zefira's music than her body. And the reviewers did not focus on what she sang and preferred to describe her looks, her age, what she symbolized. However, as I mentioned, both she and Nardi were aware that the music they offered had to be made plausible to the East European listener, so they changed those tunes. They were attuned to the European harmonica. By and large, the Oriental melodies, tunes, and languages were a novelty for both Polish Jewish audiences and also Polish audiences. Although, as I mentioned, arranged and westernized, they still differed, and most reviews made little attempt to understand the music. Most of the reviewers I quoted were men. This is also a maybe interesting side note, though even female reviewer Thea Weinberg, who was a reviewer for Eva journal that was a feminist Jewish journal published in Warsaw, called Sfera's music naive and focused little on the music and rather than the aspect I mentioned before. Musicologists who have studied Sfera's, they stressed her role as a mediator between Eastern and Western music traditions, and the artist herself later on very likely positioned herself as this kind of a bridge mediator. So that, but that link wasn't seen obviously by the reviewers, and even less by the Polish audiences, who also came to listen to the songs. The renowned Polish musicologist of the time, Zdzisław Jachimecki, he commented that she was, I'm not quoting the whole part, but that she sounded like a street urchin. Though he was very invested in researching folk traditions, but I guess some traditions were more true to him than the other. Among Polish Jews, Middle Eastern music played a role similar of jazz in the United States at the time. So, like jazz for some artists and reviewers of the time in Poland, Sfera offered a kind of expression that was perceived as emotionally authentic, in which the listener can find his or her true self. These critiques followed the arguments of interwar musicologists like Edelson, who claimed that heat and warmth were the qualities which were characteristic of the Jewish music of the Mediterranean. On the other hand, despite the reviewers claimed that they were enchanted by her music, some of them suggested that she should have adapted some songs people knew, that is, songs in Yiddish, to her repertoire. 7 years after this tour in Poland, Sfera was also touring in America, in the United States. And here you can see the coverage and the picture which was used during that tour. These performances and the advertisements were constructed similarly to those in Poland. Maybe a bit less, in a less provocative manner. I quote here from the Cincinnati Enquirer, the charm and beauty which Bracha Zefira has in her art is largely the result of a mystic desert influence. Bracha Zefira might be called a child of a desert. But like in American coverage, we see that it's very much adjusted to the American narrative. So the American reporters, they highlight other aspects of her stage show that spoke to American mythologies. So they saw her biography, I mentioned, a biography as an example of a great talent, overcoming adversity, and they stressed this redemption from backwardness and poverty, and this speaks, of course, and plays into American myths of upward mobility. So what's interesting also is that the venues in America in which she performed were also different. In Poland, those were I mentioned big cities, and even in big cities, those were major stages. But in those like smaller towns I mentioned, that was the important affair for the whole town, and it was advertised not just in Jewish press but also in non-Jewish press. So people are coming out of curiosity, and not just the Jewish community. Whereas in America, the venues were community buildings, temples, and small theaters. So it differed. Bracha Zefira performances in Poland in 1929 marked the beginning of her great career and created a unique opportunity to connect East European Jews with the Jews of the Middle East. Zefira took note of her effect on Polish Jewry, and I quote here a note from her diary published later on in Hebrew. It was in the Conservatory Auditorium in Warsaw. That evening, after one or two songs, there was a thunder of applause. I did not know what I have brought to these people, who came backstage in admiration, she writes in her memoir. Based on the press coverage, we can say that the main attraction for the crowd was her otherness, and that she represented the peripheries of the Jewish culture as it was imagined then in Poland. The shows were designed not to confront prejudices, but to build upon and sustain them. What is more, the press coverage suggests that attitudes towards Zefira were ambivalent. Her body was fetishized and sexualized, and she was depicted as an embodiment of the primitive. On the other hand, she represented the idea of authentic Jew, a link between biblical times and the present. She was aware of that. So Zefira and her manager, being aware of these attitudes, consciously played up her image as an Oriental goddess. And this marketing and packaging ensured the success of her tours in interwar Poland. Thank you so much.